Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over 19 years, and during that time, he had witnessed thousands of contestants navigate the delicate balance between entertaining the audience and respecting the family members standing beside them on stage. Most contestants understood instinctively where that line fell, offering playful banter that brought laughter without causing genuine hurt or discomfort. But on that warm May afternoon in 2025, he would witness a man so thoroughly misjudge that boundary that he would experience something unprecedented in the show's long history. The audience, which typically remained supportive and encouraging even when contestants made mistakes or gave poor answers, would turn against a contestant with such unified disapproval that it would create one of the most uncomfortable and educational moments ever captured on the Family Feud stage. What began as one man's misguided attempt to be entertaining would become a powerful demonstration of how collective moral judgment can shift an entire room's atmosphere, and how public accountability can sometimes emerge from the most unexpected sources. If you appreciate content that examines the importance of respecting your partner and the consequences that follow when that respect is absent, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support enables us to continue sharing stories that highlight the difference between humor that builds relationships and humor that destroys them. Stories that might help someone recognize patterns in their own life that need to change. The Anderson family from Portland, Oregon stood ready to compete against the Baker family from Seattle, Washington. The Anderson family consisted of Derek Anderson, age 45, who worked as a regional sales director for a consumer electronics company, and carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to dominating conversations and closing deals through force of personality, rather than genuine connection. Standing beside him was his wife, Laura Anderson, age 43, who introduced herself as a graphic designer working from home while also managing their household and caring for their 2 children. Their daughter, Madison, age 17, was a high school senior who stood noticeably distant from her father throughout the introduction, her body language suggesting discomfort with his presence. Their son, Ethan, age 14, maintained a neutral expression that seemed practiced, as though he had learned to keep his feelings carefully hidden. Completing the family was Derek's college roommate, Ryan, age 44, who had known Derek for over 2 decades and seemed to share his loud, dominating personality and his apparent belief that volume and confidence could substitute for actual wit or insight. From the opening moments of the family introduction, Steve Harvey noticed that Derek seemed determined to position himself as the star of the show rather than as one member of a family team. He interrupted other family members when they spoke, made jokes at their expense, and frequently directed comments to the audience that seemed designed to showcase his personality rather than to support his family. Laura responded to these interruptions and jokes with tight smiles that never reached her eyes, her hands clasped tightly in front of her in a posture that suggested anxiety or discomfort. Madison rolled her eyes several times at her father's comments, her teenage disdain for his behavior barely concealed. Ethan maintained his carefully neutral expression throughout, giving nothing away. The game progressed through the opening rounds with the Anderson family performing adequately despite Derek's tendency to talk over other family members and to offer unsolicited commentary on their answers. The audience responded to Derek's behavior with increasingly muted reactions, their initial polite laughter fading into uncomfortable silence as it became clear that his jokes were not good-natured family teasing, but rather systematic belittling of the people around him. Then came the question that would serve as the catalyst for Derek's spectacular misjudgment and the audience's unprecedented response. Steve Harvey walked to the center of the stage and read from the card with his characteristic timing and energy. "We surveyed 100 people. Top 6 answers on the board. Name something a husband should never say about his wife in public." The question was clearly designed to elicit responses about the boundaries of respectful communication and the kinds of comments that crossed the line from playful to hurtful. Derek buzzed in first and answered with what he apparently considered clever self-awareness. "Anything true that she does not want other people to know." He delivered the line with a smirk and a wink toward the audience, as though he were sharing an inside joke that everyone would find amusing. The answer was not on the board. But more significantly, the audience did not laugh. Instead, there was an audible collective intake of breath, a sound that indicated disapproval rather than amusement. Steve's expression showed clear concern, but he moved on to the opposing family, who answered, "Criticize her appearance," and won the face-off. The Anderson family returned to their positions to wait for another opportunity to play. When the Anderson family next won a face-off and began playing, Derek's behavior escalated in ways that would prove disastrous. The question on the board was, name something married couples should never do in front of other people. When it came to Derek's turn to answer, he once again chose to make what he believed was an entertaining joke rather than giving a straightforward response. Well, my wife and I should definitely never let people see us trying to agree on anything, because that would reveal that we actually cannot stand each other most of the time. He laughed loudly at his own comment and looked to the audience for validation. The response was not what Derek expected. Instead of laughter or even polite chuckling, there was dead silence. Then, from somewhere in the audience, a woman's voice called out clearly, "That is not funny. That is just mean." Within seconds, other audience members joined in with similar comments. "Show some respect for your wife. Why would you say something like that? She is standing right there." The comments came rapid fire from multiple directions, creating a wave of disapproval that washed over Derek and left him looking genuinely shocked that his attempt at humor had backfired so completely. Steve Harvey stood very still, allowing the audience's reaction to continue for several moments before holding up his hand to quiet them. When he spoke, his voice was serious and carried none of his usual playful energy. "Derek, I want you to listen very carefully to what just happened here. You made a joke about not being able to stand your wife most of the time, and the audience did not laugh. They did not find it funny. Instead, they called you out for being disrespectful. That should tell you something important about how your comments are being received." Derek attempted to defend himself, his voice carrying a defensive edge that suggested he was not accustomed to being challenged or criticized. "Come on, Steve. I was just joking around. Everyone knows that marriages have their ups and downs. I was just being honest about the reality of long-term relationships. People are being too sensitive if they cannot handle a little truth." The audience's response was immediate and forceful. Multiple people began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a chorus of disapproval. "That is not truth, that is disrespect. If you cannot stand your wife, why did you marry her? Look at her face, she is humiliated." The last comment seemed to hit home because it directed attention to Laura, whose face had indeed gone pale and whose eyes were glistening with unshed tears. She was looking down at her feet, her shoulders hunched forward as though she were trying to make herself smaller and less visible to the hundreds of people who were witnessing her public humiliation. Steve Harvey made a decision in that moment to allow the audience to continue expressing their disapproval, because he recognized that Derek needed to understand the collective judgment being rendered against his behavior. After several more seconds, he held up his hand again to quiet the audience and then addressed Derek directly with an expression of serious disappointment. "Derek, what you are calling honesty and truth is actually cruelty disguised as humor. You are not being brave or real by making jokes about not being able to stand your wife. You are being disrespectful and hurtful, and the audience is responding the way they are because they recognize that what you are doing is wrong. They recognize that you are humiliating your wife on national television and calling it entertainment." He continued, his voice growing firmer. "Let me tell you something about marriage and about respect. When you marry someone, you make a commitment to honor them and to protect their dignity, especially in public. You do not get to mock your marriage or belittle your spouse and then claim you were just being honest or that people are too sensitive. What you are actually doing is revealing to everyone watching that you do not value or respect your wife, and people are responding to that revelation with the disapproval it deserves." Derek's face had shifted through several emotions during Steve's speech, moving from defensive anger to confusion to what might have been the first glimmers of recognition that he had badly miscalculated. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, his daughter Madison stepped forward and addressed him directly in a voice that shook with emotion. "Dad, do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Do you know how many times I have had to watch you make jokes about Mom in front of my friends or our family or anyone who will listen? Do you know how many times I have had to see Mom's face fall when you say something cruel and then laugh like it is funny? I am 17 years old, and I have learned from watching you that marriage is something to be mocked, and that wives are targets for their husbands' mean jokes. Is that really the lesson you want to teach me?" Her words hung in the air, and the audience responded with supportive applause for Madison's courage in speaking up. Derek looked genuinely stunned by his daughter's intervention, as though he had never considered that his behavior might be teaching his children damaging lessons about relationships and respect. Ethan, who had maintained his neutral expression throughout the game, also spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. "Dad, you do this all the time. You make jokes about Mom in front of everyone. You make jokes about marriage being terrible. You act like being married to her is some kind of burden you have to endure. And when she gets upset about it, you tell her she is too sensitive or that she cannot take a joke. But it is not a joke. It is just mean. And it makes all of us uncomfortable every single time you do it. Laura finally looked up from where she had been staring at her feet. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly through the silent studio. Derek, I have spent 20 years listening to you make jokes at my expense. 20 years of being the punchline to your stories about incompetent wives or nagging spouses or whatever stereotype you decided to lean into on any given day. I have smiled through it because I thought that was what I was supposed to do, that I was supposed to be a good sport about being humiliated in front of our friends and family. But I am not going to smile through it anymore. I am done pretending that your cruelty is humor. She paused, gathering her strength to continue. These people, this audience that you thought would laugh at your jokes about not being able to stand me, they saw through you immediately. They recognized what I have been trying to tell you for years, which is that the way you talk about me and about our marriage is disrespectful and hurtful. And they responded by standing up for me in a way that you never have. They told you that your behavior is unacceptable. And I am telling you the same thing now. This stops today, or I am done. The studio was completely silent except for Laura's voice. Derek stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by what appeared to be genuine shock at the unified front of disapproval from the audience, his children, and his wife. The audience remained silent, waiting to see how Derek would respond to his family's confrontation and to their own collective judgment of his behavior. Steve Harvey allowed the silence to stretch for several long moments before speaking again. Derek, I want you to understand what just happened here. You came on this show thinking that making jokes about your marriage and your wife would make you look funny or relatable. But instead, you exposed a pattern of disrespect that your family has been living with for years. And the audience, who could have stayed silent or laughed politely, chose instead to call you out. They chose to stand up for your wife when you were tearing her down. That is significant, and you need to pay attention to it. He continued, addressing Derek with serious concern. You are at a crossroads right now. Your wife just told you that if you do not change your behavior, she is done. Your children just told you that they are embarrassed by how you treat their mother and that you are teaching them damaging lessons about marriage. The audience just showed you that your behavior is not acceptable or funny. You can choose to hear all of that and make real changes, or you can continue being defensive and dismissive and lose your family in the process. But you do not get to keep doing what you have been doing and expect everyone to just accept it. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out much quieter and less confident than it had been at the start of the game. I never realized that my jokes were hurting people this badly. I thought I was just being funny. I thought that was what guys did, make jokes about their wives and their marriages. My dad did it. My friends do it. I did not think it was a big deal. Steve shook his head. Derek, the fact that other men engage in the same disrespectful behavior does not make it acceptable. It just means that a lot of men have not learned how to treat their wives with the respect they deserve. Your dad doing it does not excuse you doing it. Your friends doing it does not make it right. You are responsible for your own choices and your own behavior, and you have chosen to consistently disrespect and mock your wife. That is on you, not on anyone else. Ryan, Derek's college roommate who had been standing quietly throughout this exchange, spoke up for the first time. His voice carried a note of discomfort as he addressed his friend. Derek, man, I have known you for over 20 years. And I have heard you make jokes like this about Laura for most of that time. I laughed at some of those jokes because that is what guys do when their friends are joking around. But hearing it all called out like this, seeing Laura's face and your kids' faces, I realized that I should have said something a long time ago. I should have told you that the way you talk about your wife is not cool. I am sorry, Laura, for all the times I laughed at Derek's jokes instead of telling him to show you more respect. The audience applauded Ryan's acknowledgement of his own complicity, recognizing that he was modeling the kind of accountability that Derek himself needed to demonstrate. The moment seemed to create additional pressure on Derek to respond with genuine contrition rather than continued defensiveness. Derek looked at his wife, really looked at her, and seemed to see for perhaps the first time the full extent of the pain his behavior had caused. When he spoke again, his voice was unsteady, and tears were visible in his eyes. Laura, I am so sorry. I am sorry for 20 years of making you the target of my jokes. I am sorry for humiliating you in front of our friends and family and now in front of millions of people who will watch this. I am sorry for teaching our children that disrespect is acceptable in marriage. I am sorry for not listening when you tried to tell me how much my jokes hurt you. I am sorry for all of it. He turned to his children. Madison, Ethan, I am sorry for the example I have set. You both deserve to grow up seeing what a healthy, respectful marriage looks like, and I have not given you that. I have shown you something ugly instead, and I am sorry. Steve Harvey listened to Derek's apology and then addressed the entire family and the audience. What we have witnessed here today is a man being held accountable by his family and by complete strangers who were willing to speak up when they saw disrespectful behavior. The audience could have stayed silent. They could have laughed politely at Derek's jokes even though they were uncomfortable, but they chose instead to say clearly and directly that his behavior was unacceptable. That took courage, and it made a difference. He continued, speaking to the broader viewing audience. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in Derek's behavior, if you make jokes at your spouse's expense and call it humor, I want you to really think about what you are doing. Are you building your partner up or tearing them down? Are you showing them respect or disrespect? Are you teaching your children healthy relationship patterns or damaging ones? These are important questions, and they deserve honest answers. Steve made arrangements for the Anderson family to be connected with a marriage counselor who specialized in communication patterns and respect in relationships. The game did not resume that day. Instead, the family spent time in private conversation with counselors who could provide immediate support and guidance for addressing the patterns that had been so publicly exposed. When the episode aired 12 weeks later, the response was unprecedented. The segment went viral within hours, generating tens of millions of views and sparking intense conversations about respect in marriage, the line between humor and cruelty, and the role of bystanders in calling out unacceptable behavior. The audience's willingness to vocally disapprove of Derek's comments became a topic of significant discussion, with many praising their intervention, while others argued that they had overstepped boundaries by inserting themselves into a private family matter. Thousands of people shared their own experiences of being mocked by their partners or of witnessing such mockery and staying silent. Many expressed that watching the audience speak up had inspired them to address similar dynamics in their own lives, either by confronting partners who engaged in disrespectful humor or by supporting friends or family members who were being treated poorly by their spouses. The segment became a teaching tool in marriage counseling programs and relationship education courses. Therapists used it to illustrate the concept of contempt in relationships, which research has identified as one of the strongest predictors of divorce. Derek's jokes about not being able to stand his wife were clear expressions of contempt, and the audience's reaction demonstrated how such contempt is recognized and condemned by observers even when the person expressing it believes they are being entertaining. The Anderson family engaged in intensive marriage and family therapy following the taping. The process was difficult and required Derek to confront deeply ingrained patterns of using humor as a weapon and viewing his wife as an acceptable target for mockery. Laura worked through her own process of understanding why she had accepted such treatment for 2 decades and learning to establish and maintain boundaries about acceptable behavior in her marriage. 6 months after the initial airing, the Anderson family participated in a follow-up interview. The changes in their family dynamics were immediately apparent. Derek spoke with genuine humility about the work he had done to change his communication patterns and to rebuild trust with his wife and children. Laura described the process of reclaiming her voice and her right to be treated with respect, noting that the audience's intervention had been a turning point in helping her recognize that she did not have to accept disrespectful treatment. Madison and Ethan both expressed that they had seen real changes in their father's behavior, and that family dinners were no longer uncomfortable experiences where they had to watch their mother be humiliated. They noted that witnessing their parents work through these issues in therapy had actually taught them valuable lessons about accountability, and what it takes to repair damaged relationships. 1 year after that May afternoon, when an audience turned on a contestant who mocked his marriage, the long-term impact of that moment continued to unfold. Derek Anderson had become an advocate for respectful communication in marriage, sharing his story at men's groups and relationship workshops to help other men recognize when their humor crosses the line into cruelty. His willingness to be vulnerable about his failures and his journey toward change helped other men feel less defensive about examining their own behavior. The moment when the Family Feud audience collectively rejected Derek Anderson's attempt to mock his marriage became a powerful example of how bystander intervention can shift dynamics and create accountability. Their willingness to speak up, to say clearly that disrespectful behavior toward a spouse is unacceptable, gave Laura the support she needed to finally demand change in her marriage, and gave Derek the wake-up call he needed to recognize the harm he was causing. If this story has resonated with you or helped you recognize patterns in your own relationships or in the relationships around you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who might need to see it. Most importantly, remember that humor should bring people together and build them up, never tear them down or humiliate them. Marriage requires respect, and that respect must be maintained both in private and in public. The Anderson family learned this lesson the hard way, but their willingness to confront the problem and work toward change offers hope that patterns of disrespect can be recognized and transformed when people are willing to do the difficult work of accountability and genuine change.